Have you ever watched a moment spin out of control and thought, if just one person took a breath, everything would change? That's the thought that sticks with me whenever I replay what happened to Sheriff Jonah Cross on a humid Thursday in July, just outside Bayou Ridge, Louisiana. He wasn't wearing a star that day. He wasn't giving orders. He'd left his badge on the dresser beside an old photograph of his mother, traded his uniform for a faded tee, beat-up jeans, and scuffed work boots, and climbed into the same rumbling, sun-faded V8 sedan he'd bought his first year on the force. It ran hot and loud, but it was his, threaded through with memories of midnight shifts, front porch hellos, and the quiet pride that comes from dragging your community forward inch by inch. His destination was the little shotgun house his mother left him on Marigold Street, a place that time was slowly reclaiming, paint chalking off in strips, a chain-link fence leaning like it had sighed and given up, the porch light that never quite worked. If you've ever lost a parent, you know a house like that doesn't belong to the world. It belongs to the ache. Jonah parked in the gravel, set a toolbox on the stoop, and started wrestling vines off the gutter, working in the syrupy heat, sweat stinging his eyes. No deputies, no radio, just a son putting a place back together so the past wouldn't feel so far. He heard the tires on gravel first, then doors, two, fast, urgent. He turned and saw them cutting up the side yard, two patrol officers in polished boots and summer weight tan uniforms. Officer Kyle Redding, mid-20s, tall, jaw tight, the kind of young man who wears authority like a stiff new jacket. And Officer Malik Porter, younger, black, eyes skimming, that first-year energy that toggles between caution and wanting to do the job right. Both rested their hands near their belts. If you've ever trained rookies, you can see it in a second. Adrenaline outrunning judgment. "Afternoon," Jonah said, calm but awake. Redding didn't bother with a greeting. "You live here?" Flat, appraising. Jonah nodded. "My mother did. I'm fixing it up." Redding flicked his chin toward the sun-baked sedan. "That your vehicle?" "Registered to me," Jonah said. "Name's Jonah Cross, Sheriff, Cypress County." He didn't reach for his wallet. Any veteran knows you keep your hands visible until the temperature in a scene is known. Porter's eyebrows kicked up. "You said you're a sheriff?" "Taking a personal day," Jonah said evenly. "Doing a little work." Redding's expression didn't shift. "We got a call about a suspicious person at this property. Description matches you suspicious. The word lands differently depending on the life you've lived." Jonah tapped the folded gloves in his back pocket. "I'm clearing vines off a gutter," he said. "We'll need ID," Redding snapped, stepping closer. "Step away from the vehicle." "My wallet's in the front seat," Jonah answered. "Keys are in my pocket." "I'll move slow." "Not asking again," Redding said, whole hands settling on his taser like he wanted the weight of it. "This is where I need to tell you something plain. Fear plus pride is flammable. Most departments teach de-escalation. Most rookies can recite it. But in the field, inside the tight space of your own certainty, de-escalation feels like losing, and in some young officers, the need to be right starts hunting for a reason. Jonah raised his hands a little higher. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low. Porter shifted, the doubt visible. "Maybe we just let him get the ID." "No," Redding cut in. "We don't know what's in that car." Jonah almost smiled at the absurdity. "What's in that car is my license, a battered 6-point star, and a turkey sandwich. You want it?" "I'll unwrap it slow." But Redding wasn't listening. He was composing a narrative. He circled the sedan, sniffed dramatically. "I smell gas," he announced to the summer air. Jonah shook his head. "You're smelling the old shed. Tools, stale oil, maybe a jug with a cracked cap that's been there since '98. Redding keyed his radio. "Possible accelerant. Subject not complying. Send additional non-compliant." Jonah had been compliant for 3 counties in 30 years. He taught statute in academy classrooms, taped off scenes in hurricanes, stood between angry crowds and frightened officers, and made both breathe. But none of that mattered if the only story in the yard was the one a rookie wanted to star in. Across the street, behind lace curtains in a sun-bleached bungalow, a woman watched and worried. Dolores Hart, 64, retired court clerk, a daily glass of iced tea and cable news humming on the hour. She'd made the call. She would tell you it wasn't malicious. I'd tell you it wasn't careful. "There's a man creeping around the old Cross place," she'd said to dispatch. "Looks like he's trying to get in." She didn't walk across and ask. She didn't wave. In her mind, calling was being a good neighbor. In reality, it lit the fuse. Back on the lawn, Redding paced the gravel like a man practicing lines. Porter rubbed his neck. "We could just run the plate," he offered, voice small, "and confirm. If it's wired, we don't let him near it," Redding shot back. Wired, trap car, booby-trapped. The more dramatic the words, the more justified the posture felt. Jonah stood very still, palms out, 10 fingers the color of earth and work. "I'm not moving," he said. "For 10 minutes, I haven't moved." He was a metronome of restraint while Redding grew louder, drawing a crowd he said he didn't want. "Do you know the kind of silence a neighborhood gets when something wrong is happening in plain sight?" Phones lifted, doors cracked. Folks stepped onto porches like witnesses summoned by heat. Redding popped the trunk of his cruiser, lifted out a red safety can, and came back with his jaw set, eyes bright with the kind of certainty that has to be fed. "What are you doing?" Porter asked, alarm spilling into his voice. "Neutralizing a hazard," Redding said, uncapping the spout. Jonah didn't blink, but his jaw clenched. "Think," he said, not as a plea, but as a command a good teacher gives a student. Redding sloshed a shining arc over the sun-cooked hood. Porter flinched. "Kyle, stop!" "Take command, then," Redding barked, meaning it like a dare. Porter didn't, and that hesitation, that thin sliver of silence opened the door for a flare to pop alive in Redding's hand. One hiss, one bright streak, one impossible decision, and it clattered and bloomed against the steel. Heat roared up. The old vinyl sighed and surrendered. Papers curled to ash. The windshield spidered and gave. There are moments you remember by sound. Jonah would remember this by smell. Burned rubber, scorched memories, the bitter sting of everything familiar turning to smoke. He didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He just stood in the blast of it, eyes fixed and distant, watching 30 years of a life parked in that seat. Stubs, notes, the last card his mother signed with a shaky hand. Combust into a lesson he would have given anything not to teach. "You're going to regret that," he said softly. Not as a threat, not even as anger, but as prophecy. If you've ever made a mistake and felt the floor tilt, you know the instant Redding felt it too. He doubled down anyway. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," he ordered, absurdity hanging in the air like the smoke itself. Jonah looked at the skeletal silhouette of his car and then at the trembling rookie. "I told you," he said. "You didn't want to listen." Sirens stitched the air. A second cruiser slid into the gravel. Captain Rosa Whitaker, a woman with a storm-tested face and a voice that could stop a stampede, stepped out and took in the scene. The fire, the crowd, the rookies, the man standing in the heat like a pillar. You could see her pulse jump at her temple. "What in the world happened here?" Redding straightened like a board. "We had a suspicious subject, possible accelerant. We neutralized." She cut her gaze to the burning ruin, to Jonah's hands, to his eyes. "Name?" she asked him. He pulled out a badge holder singed black along the edge, the 6-point star warped but legible. Her face changed like cloud to sunlight in one breath, and then back to thunder. "Sheriff Jonah Cross," he said. "Cypress County." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was heavy with the cost of a young man's pride. "Officer Redding," Whitaker said, not raising her voice, "did you pour fuel on a citizen's car and then ignite it?" "Ma'am, did you?" "We believed—" "Answer the question." "Yes," he said. "On what grounds?" On the smell, the call, the—" "Not on facts," she finished. Porter swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I said we should run the plate." That's when some people in the crowd stopped filming the flames and started filming Redding's face. If you work in public service, that's the frame that ends careers, the one where certainty meets consequence and camera phones become archives. Jonah didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He just looked at what was left of his car, just metal now, and said what needed saying. You weren't afraid of a bomb, he told Redding. You were afraid of being wrong. If you take nothing else from this story, take that line with you. It's not only a police lesson, it's a human one. The fire crew drowned the last stubborn flame. Water steamed. The neighborhood exhaled. And somewhere in that wet heat, a reckoning began. When the smoke thinned, the smell didn't. It clung. Burned rubber, fried wiring. The distinct sweetness of old photos turned to ash. Captain Whitaker cut a radius around the scene, redirected the onlookers, ordered body cam uploads, and told Redding to stand by the cruiser and stop talking. Authority done right is not about volume, it's about clarity. She walked to Jonah and stood with him, not in front of him. Do you want me to call state? She asked. Jonah watched a blackened sliver fall from what used to be his dashboard and said, No, I'll handle it. A choice like that isn't about leniency. Sometimes it's about ownership. He was the one burned here. He would decide how the fire's lesson would travel. Porter sat on the curb, elbows on knees, the day suddenly heavier on his shoulders. I don't know what's in his personnel file, but I know the look, a young man realizing that quiet can be as loud as a match. He stood and walked over, eyes wet with something more honest than tears. I should have said it louder, he told Jonah. I should have stopped him. Jonah didn't let him off the hook. You should have, he said, voice even. Do better next time. That's how you pay for this. If you've ever frozen when your voice mattered, you know what it costs. The only decent thing to do afterward is to change. A few minutes later, Dolores Hart, sun hat, sandals, and that pinched look of someone staring down a mistake, crossed the street. She clasped her hands. I made the call, she whispered. I saw a man I didn't recognize, and I assumed. There was no righteous speech in Jonah, only a tired truth. You could have asked, he said. That was my mama's house. She nodded, eyes wet. I'm sorry. He didn't perform forgiveness for the crowd. He simply said, I believe you, and left it there. Because sorry doesn't rebuild anything by itself. It just opens the door for the work to start. Back at the substation that evening, Whitaker wrote her preliminary report in the blunt language liability demands. Officer initiated ignition of private vehicle without exigent justification. Subject identified himself as sheriff. Verification steps were available and ignored. That's not poetry, but it is accountability. Meanwhile, Jonah drove home in a pool car, quiet, anonymous, the opposite of the old V8 that announced its arrival from a block away, and put the charred badge holder on his kitchen table beside his mother's photograph. He didn't sleep much. You don't sleep after a day like that. You compose a story that contains the facts because the facts are what force a system to change. The next morning he shaved clean, pinned a polished star above his heart, and walked the long corridor to his office as heads turned and conversations thinned. He didn't clear his throat or rattle his sword. He opened a new report on his laptop and typed a timeline from the first tire crunch to the last hiss of foam. He included descriptions, badge numbers, words spoken and words swallowed. He wrote down that the officer was given multiple pathways to verify identity and chose none. He documented the neighbor's admission. He logged the smell the rookie imagined, the smell the street actually carried, and the precise moment the flare sang to life. He did not embellish. He did not sharpen the edges for effect. If there's anything I wish more people understood about reform, it's this. What forces change isn't outrage alone. It's complete records attached to consequences. That afternoon, State Inspector Regina Holt arrived. Expression spare, questions clean, the kind of listener who can make a person say too much. She watched the body cam footage from both officers. Redding's voice pitched just a touch higher than the words warranted. Porter hanging back, his camera catching the red can and the brief shake in Redding's hand as the flare sparked. When the video ended, Holt closed her notebook. Do you want them fired? She asked Jonah. And it wasn't casual, it was the fulcrum. Jonah looked at the printed stills of a car that had carried him to funerals and small victories, to his mother's last hospital visit, and to 100 scenes he never talks about at dinner. He thought of Porter's swallowed objection and Redding's bright, brittle certainty. I want discipline that teaches, he said finally. I want policy drilled so hard No one confuses drama for danger again. And I want the message to travel farther than 2 careers. People forget this. But punishment without pedagogy only breeds resentment. Whitaker put Redding on administrative leave pending investigation and stripped him of field duty. Porter stayed on under intensive retraining and a new field training officer who understood that skepticism and humility are protective gear. Holt recommended a departmental in-service built around 4 pillars: presumptive verification before escalation, bias interruption, rank-agnostic professionalism, and community proximity. Fancy words for simple habits. Check, breathe, listen, and know where you are. A week later, Dolores walked into the sheriff's office lobby with an envelope and a note. The check wasn't large, retiree large, not lawsuit large, but it was earnest. The note said, "I'm sorry for what I assumed about you. I will introduce myself next time. If you're cynical, that will sound small. If you've ever tried to change a neighborhood, you know small is exactly how big starts." Jonah sent a thank you that didn't absolve her, only acknowledged the step. Meanwhile, the community did what communities do now. It narrated the thing. Posts flew. Clips of the flare circulated. There were comments sharpening into tribes. One side saying, "See? This is why." The other saying, "But what about?" Jonah didn't wade into that. He knows the internet doesn't hold nuance well. Instead, he walked the floor of the department and asked recruits questions like, "Where does your certainty come from?" And "What would you do if the person in front of you outranked you and you didn't know it?" He took the charred metal skeleton of his badge holder and had it mounted in glass with a small plaque. "Certainty is not evidence." He hung it in the training room at eye level, so every new hire would have to look past it to sign the code of conduct. Porter asked to meet with him. They sat in Jonah's office, door closed, the air heavy with the gravity of apprenticeships that almost end. "I could say I learned a lot," Porter offered, "but it sounds cheap." Jonah leaned back. "Learning is cheap if it doesn't cost you anything." "What's this going to cost you?" Porter swallowed. "My comfort. The next time a partner starts a story that doesn't match the facts, I'm going to interrupt it out loud." Jonah nodded once. "Good. It will cost you belonging sometimes. Pay anyway." And what of Redding? The investigation didn't move as fast as the internet. It never does. But it moved. The phrase exigent circumstances shrank under scrutiny. Policy got rewritten, stripping discretionary phrases like "officer felt" from sections that required concrete, verifiable triggers. Redding sat in small rooms with union reps and department counsel and learned that what had felt like command was recklessness. I'm not going to pretend he turned into a parable in a month. Transformation takes longer than that, and some people never let the lesson land. But the machine he worked inside changed a little, and sometimes systems move people who refuse to move themselves. In the third week, Jonah drove out to Marigold Street in a different sedan, quiet, county-issued, deeply unfamiliar in the way perfectly functioning things can be, and stood at the edge of the gravel where a blackened stain still shadowed the earth. He knelt and ran his fingers over the cooled asphalt. A neighbor across the way lifted a hand. Another walked over, introduced himself as Tomas from the Blue House, and said, "Sheriff, if you need an extra pair of hands with the porch, I got a drill and Saturdays." There's policy and there's culture. Don't underestimate culture. A neighborhood that will ask a name before it dials is a safer neighborhood than one with 1,000 cameras and no curiosity. As the sun slid down, Jonah rewired the porch light with Tomas holding the ladder. It clicked on, a small circle of good in the dark. I've said it before. Stories like this aren't about heroes and villains. They're about choices and habits. The choice to verify before you judge. The habit of putting your ego behind your duty. The choice to say, wait, when someone else is winding themselves up to be right. The habit of introducing yourself across a fence you've had for years. The town meeting that month was fuller than usual. Folks who never came to council chambers found seats. People who always sit in the back sat a little closer. The agenda said community safety and professional standards, but what it really meant was the thing that happened on Marigold Street and how we're going to live with each other after it. The mayor spoke first, careful, legal, thread the needle cautious. Then Captain Whitaker spoke, not careful so much as clear. She explained the new verification protocol in plain language. You will run the plate before you run your mouth. You will check the ID before you check your pride. You will treat rank you don't see with the same respect you would if it were pinned to a chest. Applause rolled like a relieved exhale. A woman raised her hand and asked if the department would meet with teenagers about what to do if they're stopped. Whitaker didn't punt. Yes, she said, and we'll tell our officers what to do as well. Education goes both ways, Jonah spoke last, because he understands that timing is a kind of leadership too. He didn't tell a revenge story. He told a responsibility story. I stood still because I have learned how fast a scene can tilt, he said. I identified myself and was not believed. That tells me we have work to do in this room and outside it. The badge I wear does not make me more human than anyone else. But the badge some of us wear cannot be a costume either. It's a contract. Porter was there in the third row, spine straight like a man holding his own weight. Redding wasn't. Leave precluded it. Dolores sat on the aisle, clutching the strap of her purse like a lifeline. When the microphones were cut and the chairs scraped the floor, people didn't bolt. They lingered. They introduced themselves. They made small commitments. Porch repairs, ride-alongs, a Saturday coffee with officers and neighbors at the church hall, where the sweet tea always tastes like memory. Change rarely arrives on a trumpet. More often, it knocks softly and asks for your calendar. Days became weeks. The charred scar on Marigold faded under new gravel. Jonah put up fresh house numbers and scrubbed that porch light fixture until it shone. He walked the training room more, tapping the glass frame that held the burned badge holder, telling recruits the story without heat, with the kind of moral precision no one forgets. Certainty is not evidence, he would say. Write that on the back of your hand if you have to. He folded scenarios into the curriculum that forced rookies to say the words out loud. Let's verify. Let me check the plate. Sir, for everyone's safety, keep your hands visible while I confirm. Those are such simple sentences, but they are the opposite of oxygen for a fire. Holt's final report landed in polished language that traveled to other departments. An over-reliance on subjective threat narratives can substitute for fact-gathering and produce escalations without legal justification. Read that again, because it doesn't only apply to police. It applies to all of us when we decide the story before we check the details. The state adopted a model policy cribbed from the one Whitaker wrote. Officers from 2 parishes over came to watch the training block. Like ripples from a thrown stone, the day on Marigold moved outward, not as gossip, but as a guardrail. One afternoon, Redding asked for a meeting. He came in without a uniform, a small legal pad in his hand, and the face of a man who'd met the edge of himself. Whitaker and a rep sat at one end of the table, Jonah at the other. Redding didn't try to recast the day. He said the word I a lot. I escalated without cause. I substituted my fear for facts. I didn't listen when my partner offered verification. He didn't cry. He didn't dramatize. He did ask a question. Is there a path back? Jonah took his time. Accountability is not vengeance, and it's not a free pass. It's a map with hard roads on it. If you come back, Jonah said, you will not be the same officer. And if you are the same officer, you will not come back. Redding nodded. There was no promise in the room, only a condition. Here's the part that surprised people. Jonah didn't sue for a number that would float rumors for a decade. He settled for the car's value and for something he cared about more, a fund inside the department that underwrote community verification practices. Plate readers configured not to profile, but to confirm who a car belongs to in seconds. A plain English card on every visor with a 6-step verification script. And stipends for Saturday coffee hours, where officers and neighbors learn each other's names, so calls sound like, Jonah's boy is out there working on the fence, instead of, there's a man creeping around. Do you call that soft? I call it strategic. Money dries up, habits accumulate, and because this is a human story and not a policy manual, let me tell you what happened the night the porch light finally stayed on. Jonah stood on Marigold as dusk came purple and shy. The bulb glowed steady for the first time in years. He lifted his mother's picture toward it, her in a Sunday hat, joy in the tilt of her mouth. And he smiled the smallest smile a tired man can make. Tomas waved from across the street. Someone's radio floated the brass of a second-line tune from a porch 2 houses down. A boy on a bike with a squeaky chain cut a figure 8 in the street and said, "Evening, Sheriff," with the easy respect that doesn't come from rank, but from recognition. Before he locked up, Jonah walked inside the little house that still smelled faintly like lemon oil and letters, and he ran his fingers along the mantel where he'd placed a new frame beside old ones. In the new frame, the charred badge holder behind glass, and tucked at the corner, the last card his mother wrote, rescued from a second copy he kept at the office for fear of losing the first. He had written one line beneath it in his neat block letters. "Respect isn't a title, it's a practice. I won't tell you that one bad day made a perfect department. It didn't. There were still calls that went sideways, still personalities, still the long drag of budgets and politics. But there were fewer moments when pride beat out process. Porter's voice grew. Recruits started saying verify like a reflex. Dolores learned every name on the block. Captain Whitaker ordered a standing drill once a quarter where officers have to narrate, step by step, how they'll gather facts before force. And when a rookie somewhere started to say, "I smell," another rookie cut in with, "Run the plate." So if this story found you at the right time, let me ask you what I asked myself the night I first heard it. Are you more interested in being right or in getting it right? If you've ever stood beside a small fire of your own making, you know how seductive the first option is. Choose the second. Wherever you have power, over a scene, a classroom, a crew, a family, use it to make truth easier to find than your pride. That's how a burned car becomes more than a headline. That's how justice stops being a speech and starts being a habit the whole street can see. And if you were Officer Porter in this story, I hope you speak sooner next time. If you were Officer Redding, I hope you learn until you're different. If you were Dolores, I hope you cross the street and meet a name before you dial. As for Sheriff Jonah Cross, he didn't win by raising his voice. He won by making sure the lessons outlived the smoke. That's the kind of authority this country needs. Not the kind that burns hot and fast, but the kind that holds steady and lights the porch for everyone coming home.